But basically what they are proposing is splitting up the Postal Service. So the more profitable part being the packages and parcel, make that into a private profit-seeking company. So part of what this would mean is they say that rates might have to be raised as much as 130% in this new private company. And in the memo, they kind of just admit, this is going to be hard for a profitable company to do. So we may have to look at limiting it to 5 days a week, or certain zip codes are not going to get this obligation.
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up. Hey, it's Jordan. Happy to be joined by Paul Prescott, columnist for Jacobin, and you just delved into a major chainsaw, shall we say, that's been coming for years, but now seems to be accelerating. This time, the attack and privatization attempts on the U.S. Postal Service. This is your piece in Jacobin. Wells Fargo plotting to privatize the post office. So anytime Wells Fargo is involved, it's not good. And this is based on a leaked memo from Wells Fargo on plans to essentially split up traditional postal letter mail and keep that public versus privatizing parcels and boxes. Let me first ask you, give us the background, because this is not new, before we get to the Wells Fargo part.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And this has been a long-standing goal of the right wing, is privatizing the Postal Service. I mean, it's a big piece of public infrastructure. There's almost 700,000 Postal Service employees. So, I mean, giving a little background, I mean, one way this fight has played out is going back to 2006 under George W. Bush. A law was passed that instituted what was called the pre-funding mandate. So since 2006 until 2022, when the law was repealed, the Postal Service had to pre-fund the pensions of its employees 75 years in advance. So I would challenge anyone to show me any other public or private entity that would have to pre-fund the pensions of their employees 75 years in advance. So predictably, that has caused financial problems for the Postal Service. And then that's kind of led this drumbeat of saying, look, the Postal Service is inefficient, they're losing money. I mean, first of all, it is a public service. It's not meant to be hugely profitable, but a big reason why it's been struggling has been that pre-funding mandate. So that has gone on. And then, of course, Donald Trump in his first term, there were flirtations with privatization. He would mention it here and there. People may remember, I know it seems like ancient history now, but it wasn't that long ago. During the 2020 election, there was a big controversy over the Postal Service. The Postmaster General that Trump appointed, Louis DeJoy, there was complications with mail-in ballots. They were basically trying to cut mail-in ballots and close centers right in the lead up to the election, and there was a lot of public pushback to that. So now this has come around again. Trump has early in his second term mentioned privatizing the Postal Service. He's mentioned bringing it under the Commerce Department. And most recently, the Postal Service has entered an agreement with DOJ to look at, quote unquote, efficiencies and cost cutting and those sort of things. So the only thing is, I would say this time, I mean, just like we're seeing everywhere else, I mean, the things DOJ is doing now have also been on the right-wing dream list for a long time. But I think now we're seeing they are more serious right now. They're seeing the opening to go as far as they can go. So I think of all the moments, the Postal Service is under the most threat right now.
And by the way, fusing it with the Commerce Department, that would be under Howard Lutnick, infamously just said, my 94-year-old mother-in-law, she wouldn't mind if her Social Security check got lost in the mail.
Let's say Social Security didn't send out their checks this month. My mother-in-law, who's 94, she wouldn't call and complain. She just wouldn't. She'd think something got messed up, and she'll get it next month.
Yeah.
A fraudster always makes the loudest noise, screaming, yelling, and complaining. And if all the guys who did PayPal, like Elon knows this by heart, right? Anybody who's been in the payment system and the process system knows the easiest way to find the fraudster is to stop payments and listen.
Yeah.
because whoever screams is the one stealing.
Well,
Right.
he's a billionaire, so I'm sure he could help
Yeah.
her out. But most
Exactly.
people living paycheck to paycheck and basically can't afford to lose one Social Security check. Let me bring in Wells Fargo here. I mean, there's been one fraud case after the next over the last couple decades, mostly civil penalties, nothing criminal against Wells Fargo. But there was a memo where Wells Fargo is basically proposing different avenues or options for privatization. It leaked. What was Wells Fargo proposing, and how would it affect both, us customers of the Postal Service and, the unionized workforce?
Yeah, and I think Wells Fargo is really seeing the opportunity right now. I mean, they're seeing, what's going on, and they're saying this is our moment. And you can tell there are lines in the memo where they're clearly inspired by Doge, and they're taking Doge's framing on everything. But basically, what they are proposing is splitting up the Postal Service. So the more profitable part being the packages and parcel, make that into a private profit-seeking company, keeping the letter mail as a public entity that's taxpayer funded. And one thing that is, I'll give them credit for, it is refreshing just how blatantly honest they are in this memo. So part of what this would mean is they say that rates might have to be raised as much as 130% in this new private company. The United States Postal Service has what's called the Universal Service Obligation. So they are obligated to deliver to every address, every zip code, 6 days a week. So that means, whether you're in Manhattan or a small town in Montana with 12 people, they have to deliver mail every single day to these addresses. And in the memo, they kind of just admit, this is going to be hard for a profitable company to do. So we may have to look at that Universal Service Obligation, maybe limited it to 5 days a week, or certain zip codes are not going to get this obligation. They also are looking at real estate, and it's not surprising. The post offices, they are in every single zip code in the country, and they estimate the real estate being worth up to $88 billion. So they're looking at, can we sell off some of these buildings? And maybe, if you're in a major city, it may not feel like the biggest deal, but thinking about in rural areas, post office is sometimes like the only piece of public infrastructure. It's kind of like a connecting point for communities, and that would be a big deal to be selling off. It's also, again, about service. If you can at least go to the post office in person. I mean, think about what same thing they're doing with Social Security. People don't want to be being on the phone all the time or being on long wait times. Sometimes you just want to go to a place and get what you need to get taken care of. Same thing with these post offices. And then I think the biggest thing here they're looking at is, and again, they're brutally honest. They want to get rid of the postal unions. And again, there's almost 700,000 workers with the Postal Service. There are 4 postal unions. The 2 major ones are the National Association of Letter Carriers, for the people delivering stuff to your door. There's the American Postal Workers Union, representing the clerks in the post offices. And they're brutally honest. They say, if we privatize, we're going to get rid of the union. That's going to result in lower wages. That's going to result in worse benefits. That's going to result in less job security. And they're also smart enough to know, like, the postal unions are going to be the main obstacle to getting what they need to get done, because they're a union, they have some power, they have organization, they have resources. So that's kind of what they're really looking at. Let's break the unions. There'll be no opposition. The government should take over their pension, and the future postal workers under a private company will not get a pension. And again, these are critical middle-class jobs. You don't need a college degree. You can make a decent wage. You're not going to be rich, of course, but you can make a decent wage, decent benefits, take care of your family. There's a long history of the Postal Service being a really critical home for especially veteran workers and African-American workers. So all of that, they just want to destroy, less service, higher rates in this privatization scheme.
And, you mentioned that they were brutally honest. I want to read this part from your piece, because it seems they know this would be wildly unpopular, but are just going to do it anyway. Let me read this part here. Hold on. The authors of this memo are aware that USPS privatization will not be an easy task. They're forced to acknowledge that, quote, public, private, labor, and federal support of the USPS remains high because it, quote, provides critical service to many communities Additionally, rural community customers have a, quote, particularly strong affinity, speaking to the reality that USPS does much more than deliver mail. People rely on it for election ballots, medicine, financial services, and more. So what you're really talking about, if they are not just gutting the unionized workforce, but I assume they're going to do more with less, meaning less postal carriers, there could be delays in people getting their medicine and, crucial needs.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And the Postal Service, it kind of stands out among federal agencies. It's the highest publicly rated agency. It has the highest levels of satisfaction. People like the Postal Service. I mean, it's not hard to see why. And again, when you kind of think about it, it is kind of an amazing piece of infrastructure. I can send something across, from New York City to Los Angeles, across the country, for a very affordable rate, and kind of guarantee it's going to get there. And one other thing I'll mention, I mean, this march to privatization that I left out, when Louis DeJoy was brought in under Trump's term, they've kind of slowly started to already cut service. And people, I think, have already started to notice this a little bit. And this is the classic playbook of privatization. First, you start cutting services, and that leads the public dissatisfaction. And then you come in with the argument that, look at this public agency, they're not doing right, they're inefficient, they can't get the job done. This is why we need to privatize. But it's easier to do that if you can first start cutting things and showing that service is declining. So, Louis DeJoy released what he called the 10-year plan of, consolidating and cost cutting at the Postal Service. And already what that has meant is that they've shrunk the hours that post offices are open. They've shrunk the staff. I mean, people might have noticed. I've noticed in my post office where there was normally 2 or 3 clerks in there, there's now often only 1. So of course that means longer lines, customers are more annoyed. There's been more delays in the mail, where it would take maybe 2 days, it's now taking 3 or 4 days. So this has kind of been this like slow death by 1,000 cuts that they're hoping, again, to lay the groundwork to be able to say that there needs to be a bigger change. But again, even despite all that, the Postal Service has high public approval right now. And again, thinking about rural areas, especially, postal workers out there talk about how they're kind of like a critical lifeline. I mean, they check on seniors. I mean, they check on people with health issues. They're delivering crucial medications. Now, of course, with mail-in voting, they're a critical part of our elections that we wouldn't want to see go away. And so, yeah, people like the Postal Service. They are very popular in the public's eye. And this memo recognizes that that's going to be a barrier. How do we get around this? Now, what they recommend is, if they try to pass legislation, they know they're not going to have enough support to get over the filibuster. They're not going to get 60 Congress senators to support them. So they recommend doing it by kind of a sneaky backdoor way through the budget reconciliation process. And of course, that's a very wonky process. I mean, I still barely understand it. Most people kind of don't. It's kind of set up to be very hard to parse through what's going on. So you can imagine them kind of trying to get this in through the back door, and then before you know it, it's happened and people don't even know what really happened. But that's, again, all motivated by the fact that they know it's popular, the public would rally to the Postal Service, and you have these postal unions that can fight for their interests.
Let me ask you, I mean, not that anyone has the pay grade to get in Trump's head, but what would be really the incentive or motivation for Trump to want to allow this to happen? I mean, obviously, he's kind of surrounded himself by a cabal of billionaires, but I mean, even his base, the post office is pretty popular across party lines. I don't think there's money in it per se for Trump. Why do you think Trump, is he just kind of allowing kind of the right-wing fever dream of the last few decades? Just, do what you want?
Yeah, again, it's hard to get into his mind. I mean, clearly we're seeing, like you said, he's surrounding himself with his billionaire friends, and they're just, looting the public at this point. And, even if you look at, I was even surprised what they're starting to move towards with Social Security. Trump has always kind of been pretty consistent of like, I'm not going to cut Social Security. I'm not going to touch that. I'm not going to touch Medicare. Of course, they're still claiming they won't. They're just going to get people who are falsely using it. But that's even kind of surprised me, because that's kind of a step further than what he's been willing to do in the past. But I think it just comes down, I mean, ideologically, he's probably aligned with this. He has his billionaire friends in there, you know, in his ear, wanting to do this. And I think they're going to take this opportunity. I mean, well, they are talking about Trump for a third term, so we'll see what comes out with that. But maybe he's also thinking, you know, I don't need to get elected again. But even that's not clear right now. So again, it just seems like they're willing and more prepared to go further than they were in his first term. And again, I don't think he has an ideological opposition to it. And they're hoping they can do it without a big public pushback. And you know, something else worth mentioning, and it was very interesting to see this in there. Talking about the fear of postal union action, they referenced what was called the Great Postal Strike in 1970. And this is a really fascinating part of American history. You know, as government workers, postal workers, like other federal workers, are banned from striking. This is true back in 1970. But a group of letter carriers in New York City went on strike against the law, what we call a wildcat strike. And it just spread like wildfire across the country. And soon in March 1970, you know, postal workers across the country were on strike. And it became this crisis. And Richard Nixon actually brought in the National Guard to try and deliver the mail. There's a great video you can find on YouTube where someone in the National Guard in a sorting center, and a reporter asked, like, do you know what you're doing right now? And he's like, honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. And the postal workers won. I mean, they broke the law. It was illegal. The National Guard came out and they still won. And that is what brought to be the current mode of collective bargaining. That won them collective bargaining rights, that put the Postal Service as a independent government entity. So Wells Fargo references that and says, like, look, even though striking is illegal, they were able to do it in 1970. And that's what we fear. We fear that postal workers are going to unite and take labor action against us. Now, again, I can't sit here and say that will or will not happen, but you are seeing postal workers starting to mobilize more against this attack.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, just history lesson for viewers, Wells Fargo is one of the banks included and involved in the Flint water crisis. They issued the bonds, the fraudulent scam bonds, which I reported on, that basically pulled all the dominoes that led to Flint using the Flint River in the first place. So I say that this is not exactly a bank that's worried about people getting essential needs like water or medicine in the mail. Let me ask you, I know we're talking about the post office specifically, but there's one element of this that seems like it could spread further. And that is, okay, let's try to get the government on the hook for the pensions on the public side of the post office. And then when we split off the rest of it, the parcels, the boxes to be privatized, we won't offer pensions to those workers. Can't that be the playbook for other things they try to privatize, where have the government cover the pensions, but no pensions for new hires on the privatized end?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, sadly in this country, the idea of a defined benefit pension for a lot of people is like a mystery. And it's talked about as if it's just like a relic of history. You know, most people now have 401ks, but I mean, defined benefit pension is more secure. It is better. It allows you to have a good guaranteed retirement. And, you know, if you look at the union landscape in this country, only 6% of the private sector is in unions, sadly. But the public sector is still pretty high. Roughly 33% of public sector workers are in unions. And that's kind of why you see the concerted attack on teachers' unions, for example, and now federal unions. And so these are the unions where they still have these defined benefit pensions, where you're not kind of just like relying on the stock market. And again, think about what's been happening recently with the trade wars, the economy. You know, people's 401ks are taking a hit. It's a very insecure way of securing our retirement. So they're really looking at that. Like, can we get rid of like this last sector of workers that have defined benefit pensions? Let's get rid of that. So again, they want the government to kind of take on that debt, and then future workers will not have it. So again, I could very much see this being applied to other public entities. I mean, you know, the federal workforce and other agencies also, most of them have these secure pension plans. And I think that's going to be and again, they look at it as this is a liability. We can't have a private company. No private company is going to want to take on this pension plan. So let's get rid of it. And again, so I see that as a danger because, they're attacking it from all sides. So on the one hand, you're cutting Social Security, and then you're also going to cut secure pension plans. And now 401ks are not even secure in the market. So it's like, what do you expect working people to do? And, we should be getting back to the point. We shouldn't be looking at pension plans as a luxury. This should be something all workers have. You work your entire life. You should be able to retire. You shouldn't be forced to work at Walmart when you're in your 70s.
Right.
And we're seeing, I don't have the statistics on hand, but a big increase in elder poverty in this country. And again, it makes sense. I mean, there's less of these good retirement plans, less unions around. So it makes sense that people are being forced to work longer into old age and are more poor while doing it.
Last question, I guess, is kind of a twofer. One, what's the timeline here? Is this just kind of like a memo that leaked that they're talking about 5 years from now? Or are they talking about, hey, let's try to do some reconciliation bill now while Trump is, quote, flooding the zone with all this crazy shit? And the second thing, you mentioned the unions. I mean, this would not be the Chuck Schumer opposition. Like, the unions will not take this, lightly. And they will not be able to ram this through lightly. Can you kind of paint a picture of, if they try to do this, what kind of opposition, fierce opposition, could you be looking at, across the board strike of postal workers if they tried to do this?
Yeah, this is a good question. I mean, as terms of the timeline, it seems like it's imminent. They want to do this as soon as they can. A recent development over the last couple of weeks. So the Postal Service has entered into a partnership with DOGE to look at cost cutting, and still a little murky what exactly they're planning, but it seems like they want to do a similar kind of retirement buyout that they offered to other federal workers to retire early that could affect up to 10,000 postal workers. And then I imagine they're going to want to try to make cuts beyond that. And recently, Louis DeJoy, who again is the Postmaster General Trump appointed, recently resigned.
Right.
Now, some people might look at that and be like, "Oh, that's good. We didn't like him." But unfortunately, what I think that means is that the Postmaster General ultimately makes these kinds of decisions, and I think this is a way of getting him out of the way for them to do other changes that are probably illegal. But there will be no one standing in their place. And some reporting actually indicates that even for DeJoy, some of this stuff was going too far. Some of the DOGE things he actually didn't like as well, believe it or not. So again, that's also a bad sign. So I think they're looking to do this quickly. Again, some of these things they're proposing are also illegal, and I imagine some of it's going to get tied up in courts. But this is where it comes to what the fight back looks like. Now, just last week on Thursday and especially on Sunday, the major postal unions had a day of action. And on Sunday, the National Association of Letter Carriers had rallies across the country. And from what I was seeing, they were actually like very big, substantial rallies. And what's kind of interesting is you're seeing their contract fight kind of intersect with this fight against privatization. So in the letter carriers, rank and file postal workers have rejected a tentative agreement on their contract where they were only offered a 1% raise, which is pretty insulting. So the rank and file kind of revolted and voted it down. They're still in negotiations. They had this rally planned for Sunday, but that rally also took on the character of being not just about their wages and their contract, but also being about privatization and fighting that. So I think that is hopeful as you're seeing the postal unions and the rank and file really starting to get agitated, really starting to mobilize and get public support. And it's intersecting with this privatization fight. So I think that's kind of where the hope lies is, postal workers and the public taking action. So I would really encourage people, if you can, try to make contact with postal unions in your area. There's national organizations like US Mail Not for Sale that are also trying to coordinate this stuff. But I think that's going to be where the fight back plays out. And again, them seeing that the public is on their side, it's not just the workers on their own, could make a really big difference in how far they're able to go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Everyone check out the piece. I'll put the link in the description. Wells Fargo plotting to privatize the post office. Paul Prescott is a Jacobin contributor and columnist. We'll stay in touch on this.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely.